Hey everyone, Monty Spa here, and today I was thinking we could all take a look at a fellow content creator who goes by the name of Acerthorn. I've been meaning to make this video for a very long time, but I'm extremely lazy, so yeah, it's like a year late. Sue me. Also, I apologize for the background noise, if there is any. There probably will be. I'm in my dorm, and I'm like right next to the road, so it's very shitty, but what are you gonna do? To give you all an understanding of why I'm making this video to begin with, I'd like to take you all back. Start of the pandemic. It was around March. I was home from college because we had all just gotten kicked out. Scrolling through YouTube, as usual, I was probably watching Markiplier's Five Nights at Freddy's compilation or something, hiding in the comments. Obviously, I'd already pissed myself once. Wasn't going to risk a second time when I noticed a suggested video in my sidebar, and it was a Dark Souls video. And I was like, fuck yeah, I love Dark Souls. And it was a Dark Souls retrospective even. Those are classics. But my joy turned to ash in my mouth as I finished reading the title of the video. Dark Souls retrospective, Dark Souls sucks, and here's why. Now I thought, it can't be true. Dark Souls can't suck. It's a great game. Ran upstairs in a fit of rage and grabbed my Princess Natalia Luzu Kinlasko Lamveldeer body pillow. Ran back downstairs to my laptop. I held her close to me and shakily engaged the video. It was going to be a hard watch, and I was going to need a cute hentai babe to help me get through the inevitable truth bombs that I was about to witness. Acerthorn made a pretty scathing retrospective on the game, but it's completely riddled with false equivalencies, misleading and deceptive information points, and it's generally just to showcase that being bad at a video game does not equate to a video game being bad. But I don't really think Acerthorn realizes this, so today I'm going to try to dissect this video and explain why it's such a bad retrospective and showcase how Acerthorn could really stand to improve some of his critiquing skills. This video isn't only going to be focused on his points against Dark Souls though. There were a few things he does in the video that I just cannot agree with personally, and I feel the need to call him out for them. The majority of the focus will obviously be on the Dark Souls stuff though, so don't worry about that. I'm absolutely thrilled that you're all joining me for this, and as Philip DeFucco would say, let's just bounce right into it. Okay, well actually we can't bounce into it just yet, because there's a few disclaimers that I need to go through first. For starters, I will be heavily referencing and showcasing Acerthorn's video, and you can find the link to the full thing in the description. I highly encourage you to watch his video alongside my own so that you get the full context. The second big disclaimer is that, yeah, I am a huge Dark Souls fan, and my opinion on these games is definitely biased. However, despite the fact that this game is literally my favorite game of all time, I don't want this to come across as just blind fanboyishness for the game, because I don't believe that Dark Souls is perfect. There's plenty of flaws with these games. I've played them for several hundreds of hours. I've experienced a lot of them. My point here is basically that despite the fact that I disagree with almost all of Acerthorn's points against the game, I don't believe that you can't make points against the game, if that makes sense. I'm not disagreeing with Acerthorn solely because he's attacking a game I love. I'm disagreeing with his points because they're awful, and they don't actually hold up when scrutinized. Hopefully by the end of the video, I'll be able to prove that to all of you. With all of that out of the way, I think we can finally get started. My structure for this video is I'm just going to be going through Acerthorn's points one by one as they appear in his video, and address the issues in the order that I see them occur.
Dark Souls sucks, and today I'd like to share with you why I feel that way. What's up guys, Acerthorn here, and welcome to another video game discussion video. I do these analysis and discussion videos on a regular basis, so if you'd like to see more of them, hit that subscribe button to stay notified.
Okay, I want to pause here at the start because one big point of contention I have with this video is the overall framing. The title of the video is Dark Souls Retrospective, and he goes on to describe it as an in-depth analysis and discussion video on the game. This will be relevant soon, but I just want all of you to really think about what an in-depth analysis or a retrospective of a video game entails. What's the expectation on your part as a viewer when you hear someone say that they're going to be doing an in-depth analysis or a retrospective on a game? How familiar do you expect them to be with the content that they're reviewing? Just think about it for now. It'll be relevant soon enough.
Now before I get started, I want to produce a full disclaimer. I attempted a blind Let's Play of this game back when my channel was less than a year old. I ended the LP after only 13 episodes for 2 reasons.
So Acerthorn admits to never actually having completed the game. He only played 13 episodes of a Let's Play on it before giving up. What are the reasons that he gives for not finishing the game? Well, the first one is that the game was underperforming on his channel. It was chosen for him by his fans who had responded to a Twitter poll, and based on said poll, Acerthorn saw that the most people wanted him to start a blind Dark Souls Let's Play. Despite the interest from his fans, however, the videos didn't perform as well as he had hoped, so he ended up quitting the Let's Play.
One of those reasons was because the game was chosen for a blind LP not by me, but by my fans at the time. As one of my LPs was wrapping up, I held a poll asking everyone to vote for my next LP from a choice of 5 different games. Dark Souls Remastered won that poll, so I started that blind Let's Play series. Well, when I did the LP, it didn't get views. Now, as a YouTube content creator, I need views on my channel to survive, so obviously this was disappointing.
The fact that he never finished the game before giving his retrospective is an issue I'll tackle soon enough, but the entire reason I'm mentioning why he decided to stop in the first place is because Acerthorn decides that this is a great justification to attack and berate his own fanbase for lying to him about wanting him to create a Dark Souls Let's Play, and then not watching the videos.
This is made 10 times as disappointing when you take into account the fact that I chose this game to LP because it got the most votes in a poll. It's one thing to pass on watching a video that you're not interested in. It's quite another thing entirely to state outright, we are interested in this series, and then not actually watch the series when I make it.
This is really bad right off the start, and I want to look into this to understand Acerthorn's character a bit better. For starters, he uses this extremely arrogant voice as he talks about his fans this way, claiming that they outright lied to him. He even cites the Twitter poll that he took, and it's one of the most confusing pieces of evidence I've ever seen someone use to try and support their point. Let me get this off my chest just as a start. Acerthorn has an incredibly entitled take on this entire situation. A YouTuber's fans don't owe that YouTuber anything. YouTubers are blessed to have an audience in the first place. It shouldn't matter if those fans suggested that they were interested in something that they were going to be putting out content for. It's not like they signed a blood pact to give you views and watch time or something. Speaking to Acerthorn directly here, you're way too small of a YouTuber to be walking around with this big of an ego. These people don't owe you anything. And since we've been graced by the big ace in the sky himself with the poll that he actually took, let's really give it a good look over to see exactly how many of his fans quote-unquote lied to him. If you guys could direct your attention to the number in the bottom right corner of the poll, you'll see that it says total responses 15. There's only 15 people who ever responded to this thing in the first place, and looking at the bars, you can see that Dark Souls only received 6 of those total votes. I'm really not sure what Acerthorn was hoping to prove by citing this poll. Even if I completely agreed with his approach to yelling at his fans for lying to him, the best case that he can make here is that 6 people lied to him. But he acts as though his entire subscriber base of 1,000+ people deceived him or something. To be completely fair, Acerthorn may have had substantially less subscribers at the time of this poll or the Let's Play that he was doing than he does now. I don't know, I haven't been following him for that long. But even if his entire fanbase was those 15 people, the 6 people that responded for Dark Souls, they don't speak for the entire population. Of course, I don't believe that it's ever justified to attack one's own fanbase in this fashion for videos not performing well. So even if Acerthorn had 1 million people who took the poll and answered with Dark Souls, and it still didn't get views, I wouldn't think he was justified here. Typically, when most content creators put out a video that underperforms, their immediate reaction isn't to blame their fans for not giving them views. They instead look at the video and try to see if they just created something that wasn't enjoyable to watch. I'm honestly just dumbfounded that he cited this poll and thought that it would bolster his argument. I can maybe sympathize a bit for Acerthorn here, seeing that he probably went out of his way to buy a game he doesn't have any knowledge about, to please his fans only for the videos to not do very well. But even factoring this in, his response to the entire situation is just extremely childish. Getting back on track though, the entire reason he brought this up was to point out that he never actually completed Dark Souls or his Let's Play. The second reason that he ended up giving for not completing the game is that he wasn't having any fun with it. And you know what? Aside from the entire attacking his fan base part and reason one, I actually don't care that he didn't finish the game. Well, that's actually not true. I do care, but we can discuss that in a minute. What I actually don't mind is that he doesn't like the game. I think it's entirely reasonable to look at a Let's Play on your channel and see that it's underperforming, whatever underperforming is relative to 6 views at least, and know that you aren't enjoying the game and decide to stop. I want to make explicitly clear right here and now. The fact that Acerthorn doesn't like Dark Souls as a game, it's irrelevant to me. I couldn't care less, and assuming he somehow sees this video, I want him to know that coming from my own mouth. Like, I don't care that you dislike Dark Souls. It's perfectly reasonable to dislike Dark Souls. It's not a game for everyone. But it does make me wonder why you would decide to put out a retrospective on a game that you didn't complete and that you're clearly biased against. Remember how earlier I asked you guys to keep in mind the title and how Acerthorn describes his video? It's a retrospective, an in-depth analysis, that kind of stuff. This is where Acerthorn is going to try to justify the fact that he uses this title and those descriptors in his video despite not having finished the game. Listen to him here.
However, despite having an incomplete experience with this game, I will not pull any punches in this retrospective. After all, if the game can't get me hooked into it after the first couple of hours, it doesn't deserve to keep my attention after that. I do not believe in continuing on with a game despite not having fun just because of some arbitrary expectation that I can't truly have an opinion on the game, a valid opinion at least, unless I've played the game for an arbitrary number of hours. If there is an arbitrary length of time I should be expected to play a game before I can have a legitimate opinion on the game, I'd probably go with 2 hours, since that's the maximum length of time I'm allowed to play the game before I can get a refund on Steam. For this reason, despite being aware that I am reviewing an incomplete playthrough, every criticism I make at the game today will come without the slightest hint of hyperbole.
And this is how he's going to try to avoid criticism for not knowing anything about the game. The problem here is that he's going to insist that this is just his opinion on a game and nobody can invalidate his opinions, but he presents his information as though it's factual, when sometimes it just isn't. And he didn't frame the video as an opinion piece on Dark Souls, he framed it as an in-depth analysis and a retrospective on the game. I know that this is kind of arguing semantics, but just hear me out here. If someone came up to me and told me the title of a video game, just the title, let's say it was Barbie's Bukkake Dreamhouse 2, the Squeakquel, for the PlayStation 2. I could upload a video and say, this game is, in my opinion, amazing and fantastic and wonderful, and it's the best title on the PS2. I literally know nothing except the title, and you know what? It's still a valid opinion. It's completely reasonable for me to have that opinion based on the limited information that I have on the game. But now let's pretend that I say exactly those same things about the game, but I title the video as Barbie's Bukkake Dreamhouse 2 The Squeakquel Retrospective, and I open the video by claiming it's going to be an in-depth analysis of the game. Suddenly the video holds much less weight, because when you call a video a retrospective and describe it as an in-depth analysis, it implies some level of objectivity and baseline knowledge on the game. Personally, I can group it into 3 separate categories. We'll call them tiers. Tier 1 is an impressions or an opinion video on a game. You can have any level of knowledge about something for these kinds of videos, and nobody's really going to bat an eye. It's just your opinion after all. Tier 2 is a review video, which to me suggests that the person in question has played through a game at least once. Maybe they don't know all the endings, maybe they haven't tried a lot of different playstyles, but they've at least completed the mandatory content in a game once through to show some level of understanding of the game's mechanics, its story, etc. Now Tier 3, a retrospective or in-depth analysis video on a game, would be for me someone who has spent a lot of time with the game. They've beaten the game at least a couple of times, and they've tried a few different playstyles. I would expect them to also have a very strong grasp on the story and mechanics that a game has to offer. I understand that this is very contextual. Based on what kind of game you're having, you might not be able to use different playstyles, so on and so forth. But in the context of Dark Souls, those are the kind of things I would be looking for. Acerthorn will present his video as though it's Tier 3, but justify his lack of knowledge on the game by saying it's more like a Tier 1 video. This is essentially clickbait. He's trying to conflate Tier 1 style videos with Tier 3 style videos, but just like subs on Twitch, they aren't comparable. A Tier 3 sub to Pokimane is not the same as a Tier 1 sub to Pokimane, and everybody knows it. I do understand that some people might see differently on this. I mean, obviously Acerthorn is a prime example, but I can't be alone in thinking that saying you're giving a retrospective on something or an in-depth analysis on something implies a certain level of professionalism and understanding of a game. Acerthorn, however, says that it's just his opinion, and it's completely valid despite not having completed the game. I can't agree with this, however, and I'm going to be harder on this video and the points it makes because there's a difference in my expectations on how well a video needs to present its points and prove its thesis when we're talking about an opinion piece versus a retrospective. People have pointed this out to Acerthorn in his comments, and he gets extremely defensive about it. He immediately resorts to saying, "Go alert YouTube for my video being clickbait, and have it taken down then if it's so misleading," but I'm pretty sure he knows as well as I do that it's not that simple. YouTube wouldn't give a shit about something like this. This isn't like pretending that you made an educational video only to present the viewer with hardcore porn. It's just presenting the video as though it's factual and well constructed, only to find out that it's the complete opposite. So even if you're willing to conflate Tier 1 vids with Tier 3 vids, and consider retrospectives and opinion pieces as entirely interchangeable, and you think that calling something an opinion piece has the exact same implications as calling something a retrospective, I'm still going to point out why his arguments against the game are really poorly made. If this helps at all make my point here, Acerthorn only ever made it to the gargoyles in Dark Souls, meaning he only beat about 15% of the mandatory content of the game, and that's more like 10-ish% of the overall game. If you're wondering how I came to that percentage, the Lord Vessel is the halfway point, so it's like 50%, and then split up the first half by ringing the two bells and Sen's Fortress and Anor Londo. Anor Londo and Sen's make up like 20% of the first half of the game, so the two bells would then be 30%, and Acerthorn only made it to the first bell, so he made it like to the 15% mark. That's certainly enough to justify giving an opinion on the game, but is it enough to create a retrospective? I mean, personally, I just don't agree with that. It's taken just this long to actually start the parts where he talks about the game, but starting here we can actually discuss his points specifically on the game. So let's see his first critique.
Right off the bat, I noticed a huge problem in this game's design. Before I literally did anything else in the game, the first order of business is to just open the fucking door, and I couldn't figure out how to do that. Turns out, the HUD does indeed tell you how to open the door, except for one tiny problem. The HUD was disabled by default.
So Acerthorn opens up with his first criticism, which is that the game started out with the HUD disabled from the start, which hampered his ability to play the game. Now, I'm not entirely sure how this bug works, if it's literally just the HUD not showing up, or if it actually impacts the ability to perform action prompts in the game. Acerthorn claims that he tried bringing up the menu, and even though he heard the sound of the menu coming up, the menu itself didn't display. So ultimately, he wasn't even able to get out of the opening cell. I'm not sure if he was literally not able to leave thanks to like messed up functioning of the game, or if he just didn't do it correctly. He didn't like hit the right button prompt or even pick up the key or whatever. He doesn't have footage proving any of this, but I do believe that this happened to him. I haven't experienced the bug myself though, so I can't speak to how badly it actually impacts the game. But regardless of that, this obviously would be extremely detrimental to anyone's playthrough, let alone a new player. This isn't necessarily a bad criticism of the game just yet, but we're about to see how he twists this bug into a completely misleading argument to attack something else entirely.
Seriously, game? I heard that this game was punishingly difficult and threw you precisely 0 bones throughout the entire playthrough. However, I was also consistently told that the difficulty was extreme but fair. It never pulled any kind of cheap tricks to artificially increase the difficulty. If you ever got stuck, it's because the game bested you, not because it tricked you. So what's with this horse shit? I never expected that Get Good applied to the game's basic controls, making me figure out on my own something as basic as how to display the HUD? How is that a fair challenge? So right off the bat, before I even get out of the first goddamn room, this game is already getting on my last damn nerve.
The issue with this is that he's using a one-off bug as a springboard to attack the game's overall difficulty. Everyone's heard the meme that Dark Souls is challenging yet fair, but Acerthorn insists that this is not a fair challenge. I agree with him, but the problem is that this is also not intentional game design. The designers didn't intend for this to be part of the challenge, and considering that the bug went away immediately for him, it shows that the game itself isn't actually impacted by this unfair bug, at least not as a whole. All he needed to do was reset the game, and it went away. When people talk about how Dark Souls is difficult, they're referring to the combat like 90% of the time. The extra 10% is usually like confusion on where to go at any given point. Nobody references bugs impacting the game to make it difficult. He's using the bug as a springboard to attack the game as a whole, but the bug doesn't impact the game as a whole. It only impacted this very opening section, and it never returned afterwards. So it's misleading to use this as a basis to attack the game's difficulty. If the bug never went away or was constantly reoccurring or something, I could agree with the criticism, but it doesn't constantly reoccur for him, and it never did for me either. It was an issue that was resolved immediately. All he had to do was reset his game. Let me make this clear for everyone who's watching, Acerthorn included. Bugs are bad, and they deserve to be criticized, but a single bug does not impact overall game difficulty and make the game unfair as a whole. You can criticize the game for the bug all you want, but it's not reflective of the game being unfair. It's reflective of the game being unrefined at worst. And again, it only happened once to him, and it was extremely easy to fix. Moreover though, let's really dig into this bug because I had never encountered it and neither had any of my friends, so I decided to look it up, and it turns out that the only people I was ever able to find who were impacted by this bug were people who played the game on Steam, aka the PC port. So, surprise surprise, the PC port for Dark Souls still sucks. If you know anything about the original Dark Souls game, the port to PC on that was also extremely rocky, and I don't know who's responsible for porting these games, but they can't seem to get it down for some reason. But ignoring that, let's apply this knowledge to Acerthorn's criticism. The bug is not reflective or representative of overall unfair game design, and moreover, it's specifically an issue with the PC port of the game. So it's not even necessarily a game flaw, it's a port flaw, and Acerthorn never points this out. Now to be fair, I don't believe this is Acerthorn intentionally withholding this info from people because, again, he doesn't know much about Dark Souls and he clearly never experienced it on consoles, so it's not surprising that he doesn't know this. But even still, he could have done a little extra research to realize that this was a port issue with the game, and he could have mentioned it in the retrospective for clarification. I'm not going to go too hard on him for this specific aspect of this point, but hey, now we all know. The bug doesn't make the game unfair, it makes it unpolished, and specifically, it makes the PC port unpolished. To Acerthorn's credit, however, this isn't the only example of unfair difficulty in Dark Souls that he'll cite, so let's see his next example.
So after I figure out how to open the door, I go through the asylum, killing other undead who apparently have also escaped from their cells. Then, this happens. Alrighty. Ow! Okay, how exactly is that a fair challenge? There was literally 0.429 seconds from the moment this boulder appeared on screen to the moment it hit me. How was I supposed to dodge that?
So here's another example of unfair difficulty where the game is screwing over the player according to Acerthorn, because there's no way that a new player could reasonably dodge the ball and avoid the damage. I don't necessarily disagree with him here, but he made this point extremely quickly and he doesn't linger on it, because if you add in some additional context, it becomes very clear that this isn't really the game being unfair, it's intended level design. So let's look closer at it. For starters, yeah, the ball is very hard to detect at the top of the stairs, and by the time you see it's coming, it's basically too late for any new player to reasonably dodge. But the ball doesn't kill him. In fact, it really doesn't do that much damage at all when you inspect his health bar. It only goes down like 25% from the full bar, but that's still unfair damage, I suppose. Well, for starters, let's imagine that this is the worst case scenario with this obstacle. Let's say that Acer Thorn died from it. Where's the last checkpoint then? It's actually extremely close in the asylum, and the run from this checkpoint to this obstacle is only about 20 seconds. So time-wise, even if Acer Thorn died here, the run back is extremely short. So next we can factor in the other kind of progress that he's made up to this point, which would be how many souls he has. Well, for any new player, the amount of souls that you'd have at this point is likely around 100, which, let's be honest, is pretty much nothing. Losing 100 souls is nothing in the context of the overall game, and it's not even like detrimental at the beginning of the game. That's like enough for a single firebomb. It's like a seventh of your initial level up. The only way that this amount of souls would be higher is if the player defeated the Asylum Demon first. But on the first run through for a new player, you can expect that this will almost never be the case. It just takes way too long to fight it. The only exception is if they chose to use the Black Firebond gift when starting the game, and they used those instead to kill the demon. But this is still extremely unlikely, because what are the chances that a new player is going to choose that gift and make the connection to use it on the boss? It's possible, but unlikely. But okay, let's assume worst case scenario here, that that's what they did, and they still ended up dying to this ball. Even then, you'd only have around 2,000 souls, which is still a pretty small amount. It's worth like 2 or 3 levels at the start of the game. So you lost that amount of souls, and now you have to go and reclaim them. As pointed out before, the run back to these lost souls would only take you like 20 seconds, and the only enemy standing between you and the souls is a single Archer Hollow, who you can easily just run past, let alone dispatch. There's practically no chance even a new player with no experience would die to this guy trying to get their souls again, which means that there's almost no chance that they would end up actually losing these souls. So overall, the amount of damage you take from the ball is minimal. The run back to the ball, assuming you die, is extremely short, and the challenge to get there is practically nothing. But the most crucial point of context left out is that the ball crashes into a wall behind the player and opens up to the knight, who gives you the key to progress in the asylum, as well as the Estus Flask, which is the healing mechanic in the game. It seems extremely likely to me that the developers intended for new players to take a small amount of damage here, so that they would be inclined to equip the Estus after getting it, and use it to understand how much it heals, how quickly it heals, and to understand how many uses they have before it runs out, because the rematch with the Asylum Demon is coming up immediately after this encounter. This damage seems very intentional to allow the player to use and understand the healing mechanic, and even in the worst case scenario, there's practically no lost progress or time from this ball. Now, is this the best way to introduce the player to the healing mechanic? I don't know, I'm not a game designer, and I'm not saying that the developers couldn't have implemented a better way to introduce the Estus Flask, but is it unfair? With all this additional context, I just really don't think you can reasonably make that argument. Just to point out to Acer Thorn how I'm not just fanboying and dismissing this point because I love the game and can't accept its flaws, let's use the same exact type of setup at a later point in which you can actually justify that the game is screwing over a new player. Just after defeating the Taurus Demon, you walk out onto a bridge and get blasted by fire from the Hellkite Drake. There's practically no warning that this is going to happen unless you're using the Miracle Seek guidance, and even then it's pretty cryptic, and you just defeated a boss and fought through an entire enemy of areas. Your health is most likely low, you're probably running out of Estus, and you have tons of souls from both the boss and all the enemies that you just cleared. And out of nowhere, a Drake comes out and torches you. Even the audio clue for the Drake, once you hear it, doesn't give you nearly enough time to run back to cover. The only way to avoid it once you've entered the bridge is to immediately turn back, which no player would do unless if they knew that it was coming, which there's no way they would know, or if you sprint immediately to the closest cover, which most people aren't going to do because why would they expect anything to happen? It just doesn't make sense. Nobody plays like that. The Drake technically was introduced prior in the level, but there's no indication that it breathes fire or that it will attack this bridge specifically, again, outside of the Seek guidance miracle, but nobody fucking uses that miracle, let's be honest. This is the exact same kind of setup of this quote-unquote gotcha moment, except the punishment here is far more severe. Dying here is much more likely. You just fought all those enemies plus a boss, so you're way lower on health, and you have far more souls to lose. And the run back to this bridge would take at least a few minutes for any player, let alone a new one. I believe it was Matthew Matosis, by the way, who coined these interactions as gotcha moments where the game throws something at you that a player really shouldn't be expected to anticipate or be able to predict, so credit to him on that. These are both technically gotcha moments, but this one is far less forgiving and far more unfair to the player. And I know for a fact that Acerthorn has even reached this point in the game, and he encountered this exact same setup, so I'm really not sure why he cited the ball and not the dragon. Is it because he was lazy and didn't review the content of the game thoroughly before putting out his retrospective? I mean, I can't be sure, but it's pretty sad that I can make his points better for him here, and I'm the one who's defending the game. Another point of clarification that I feel I should make, this isn't indicative of the game being unfair as a whole, but it does showcase that the game has some unfair moments that blemish an otherwise great experience. But Acerthorn's example is extremely weak, and there's a reason that he doesn't linger on it. His first major points against the game so far is that it's unfair, and he's only been able to prove that by resorting to citing a very infrequent and inconsequential bug, as well as a tutorial interaction to prove that the game overall is unfair. Even if he himself believes that these are good points and that he isn't intentionally misrepresenting the game, these examples are just so weak. And as far as I'm concerned, nothing he's brought up so far has proven anything of actual substance against the game. So let's move on to his next point, which according to him is actually the biggest issue with the game. This is the main reason that he dislikes Dark Souls, according to him. So let's hear him out.
And here is where we get to the biggest problem of the game. There's no real story to this game. The game is marketed as an RPG. Well, the story is the most important part of an RPG. It's like the jumping mechanics in a platformer or the gunplay in a first-person shooter. A bad story can kill an RPG, and a good story can bring an RPG with mediocre mechanics back from the dead.
Okay, so he's clearly got an issue against the story. To suggest that the game has no story is outright wrong, but we'll get to that in a moment. For starters, I just want to talk about his point that a story is the most important part of an RPG. This is entirely subjective, but he passes it off as though it's an agreed-upon statement by anyone other than himself. I can't speak for everyone watching this video, but I don't always play RPGs for the story. Zelda games are considered RPGs by most people, and I rarely find myself interested in the story of Zelda games. It's more about exploring the world and taking on dungeons and jerking off to the Gerudo women from Breath of the Wild. Dark Souls is extremely similar in this regard. The focus was never on the story. It's not even an RPG, it's an action RPG. The emphasis is on the action. I bet you anything you could take a poll of people who play Dark Souls games and ask them what's the most important aspect of a Souls game to those people. And I can almost guarantee you like 90% of them would answer with either combat being the most important thing or world exploration being the most important thing. Personally, on my first playthrough, and several playthroughs afterwards, I had no interest in the story. It didn't even matter. It was just extra incentive to explore the world and fight cool bosses. And the story didn't really need to push me towards those goals because I already wanted to do those things. That's not to say that the story is meaningless in Dark Souls or that it can't be criticized, but to act like the downfall of RPGs and specifically Souls games is the story is just kind of ridiculous.
This is one of the biggest reasons why Fallout 76 was so poorly received, despite it not really being any buggier than the other half a dozen Bethesda games that came before it. because at least those games had great stories to compensate for the lack of mechanical function. So when I say that this game has no story, that's quite a serious charge against it.
It's actually not, though. And why are we now comparing Dark Souls to Fallout 76? How is Dark Souls and Fallout even remotely comparable? Simply because they both fall under the same umbrella term of RPG? Fallout, from what I understand, is nothing like Dark Souls aside from this very specific descriptor. They've got very different combat, very different world design, very different goals, very different focuses. Fallout games have a lot more narrative influence, and Dark Souls games don't. Acer Thorn has a problem with comparing games that just should not be compared. He does this in his Wind Waker review as well, where he compares the story of Wind Waker to Fallout again. He's trying to compare the story of Fallout to Dark Souls right now, but it's just as stupid. These games are not going for the same thing. Their stories are not of equal importance in the overall design of the game. They shouldn't be compared. Again, not all RPGs are necessarily story-focused, especially action RPGs.
Now, people who suck this game's dick are probably typing away at their keyboards right now saying that the game does indeed have a story. It just does everything it can to hide it from the player. Well, first of all, if it goes out of its way to keep the story hidden from the player, then you really can't fault me for not noticing the story and getting wrapped up in it, can you? Second, no, it doesn't. It has a backstory, not a story. Those are not the same thing. A backstory has already happened. It's what sets the stage for the current narrative, and explains how the world and the characters got to the points they are currently at. It isn't a story, because there's no storytelling taking place. Backstories do not have any characters going on any journeys. No characters are seen struggling to achieve any goals, nor do they grow as characters in a backstory, and there certainly is no resolution to any plots.
Okay, that was a really long clip, but I needed you all to get the full context for it. Firstly, Dark Souls does not really do everything it can to keep you from understanding the story. The ending of the story is pretty ambiguous, admittedly, and a lot of understanding of the greater parts of the story are up in the air, such as which characters are good and bad, whether or not the Age of Light is a good thing or a bad thing, so on and so forth. But the story itself is pretty plainly explained to the player, so long as you pay attention to the main NPCs that you meet along the way. The Knight from the Asylum tells you that you're the chosen undead, or at least most likely the chosen undead, assuming that you're the one who ends up leaving the asylum, and that it's your job to ring the bells of awakening. If you can do that, your role in the world will be clarified. So the first part of the story is finding the bells and ringing them to uncover the truth behind the prophecy. Ringing both bells introduces the player to Frampt, who encourages you to find the Lord Vessel. And once you do, he tells you he acknowledges your role as the chosen undead, and informs you that it's your job as said undead to succeed Gwyn and take his place to further the Age of Fire, since you can do it better than he can. To do this, Frampt explains how the Lord Vessel will grant you access to Gwyn's tomb, but it needs Lord Souls to power it up to grant you that access. So now, it's the player's job to fight the 4 major bosses at the end of the game who have those Lord Souls. This is all pretty obvious to the player if you simply pay attention to the main characters that you get introduced to. The part that's hidden about Dark Souls is the lore, understanding the characters and the boss's motivations, how they got to where they are, what their goals are, things along those lines. The basic storyline is relatively simple. It's understanding how everything connects that makes Dark Souls so mysterious. And as to Acer Thorn's second point, yeah, the game does have both story and lore, but these two things are not completely separated. The lore is still part of the story. The lore explains why things are the way that they are. It defines the world and its characters. And it draws connections between the things that you do in the game and the reason that you have to do them. Someone might fight Seath and take it as extremely surface level, just a dragon boss fight in a fantasy world because Gwyn gave him a Lord Soul. You need the Lord Souls to challenge Gwyn to fulfill the fate of the chosen undead. But why is Seath connected to Gwyn? And why is he seemingly immortal with the crystal that you have to break? And why is he located in the Duke's archives? All of these elements of the story are explained through the lore, so you can't necessarily separate the two things as though they're completely unrelated, because lore gives purpose to what you do. The lore of the game explains why the world and enemies are where they are. The story of Dark Souls is your struggle through that world to kill Gwyn and to take his place as the ruler. Acer Thorn even knows that this is the case, because he makes this exact same point in relation to Skyrim immediately following this.
Compare this to some of the greatest RPGs of all time. Take Skyrim for example. The backstory for that game includes the Oblivion Crisis, the eruption of Red Mountain, which forced the Dark Elves to integrate within Skyrim, the rise of the Mede Dynasty, the Great War Forsworn Uprising, and Ulfric's assassination/dueling of High King Torygg. But the actual story of Skyrim is dealing with the fallout of those things. The main story of Skyrim is the Civil War and the Return of the Dragons. That's where all the actual storytelling happens in that game.
Tell me, Acer Thorn, what is the difference between what Skyrim does here and what Dark Souls does? Skyrim has lore explaining why the world is the way that it is before you can play in the aftermath of said lore to play out the character's story. Dark Souls is doing the exact same thing. The lore establishes the main enemies and why they're important and how they shaped the world and how the world became the way that it is. The story is fighting through that world to conquer the bosses because you're the Chosen Undead and you're fighting to fulfill the prophecy of the Chosen Undead. It's pretty much one for one. It's like exactly the same setup. I don't understand how you missed this.
Dark Souls may have some world building that explains the origins of each of the various items I can acquire in the game. Characters I meet on my travels may have some really interesting backstories, none of which actually matter in the slightest to the conceit of your main quest.
How can you say this, though? The bosses are the main characters that get lore establishing their goals and past accomplishments which were directly responsible for why the world is the way that it is. The entire reason that you're undead is because of these people. The entire reason the enemies exist in the world that you need to fight through is due to these people. They're the entire reason that you have to set out on your journey. They doomed you to live out your life until you become hollow. The only chance you stand against this eventual fate is becoming the Chosen Undead and killing them all off to take their place. They directly impact you and your motivation and your struggle in the world. Again, I'm not sure if you're actively avoiding this obvious information, or if it's simply just because you haven't played the game to completion, which showcases why no one in their right mind would make a retrospective on a game that they don't know anything about. Can anyone watching this imagine insulting and critiquing a story to something that you've never actually watched or played or read? This is like trying to write a book report on a book that you've never read. It's falling apart because you have no actual idea of what goes on in the story. Acer Thorn's been completely wrong about the story at every point so far, and it's entirely due to his lack of knowledge. Again, why on earth would you make a retrospective on something you don't know anything about? It just makes you look stupid if nothing else. You could probably fool a new player who's never played or beaten a Souls game, but anyone with any level of understanding of this game is immediately going to call you out for this.
The player character has no reason to actually be invested in any of this. The player character has absolutely no backstory whatsoever. For all we know, he has spent his entire existence in this dinky little cell. Then he escapes from his prison and gets dropped into a world he doesn't know and is expected to risk his life saving.
The player doesn't need a backstory. How many games are there where you play a self-insert character who doesn't have a backstory? Why is the player's backstory even relevant here? Their motivation isn't to save the world, it's to save themselves. The game shows us that we're undead, we're not hollow yet, but it shows us that we will inevitably become hollow if we don't do anything, and it shows how hollowing takes an otherwise sane person and makes them a mindless enemy. This isn't your player being tasked with being the moral beacon to save the world or something. You're not Link saving the world from the potential evil of Ganon, you're just a guy who doesn't want to go insane. It's the same as any character who's thrust into any situation in which their life is at stake. If they start fighting things or being defensive or whatever, you already know what their motivation is. A person would inherently want to preserve their own life. It's the exact same in Dark Souls, except dying is now replaced with going hollow. And you, as the player character, you assume the role of the character in the game. So you would inherently want to preserve your character's life. The Chosen Undead story is your only potential to save yourself, so your drive to kill the bosses and explore the world is out of self-preservation. It's true that the games never explicitly say that doing this is going to save you or anything, but it's also made clear that doing nothing isn't going to save you either. This is your only shot. Doing nothing is going to guarantee that you eventually go hollow. Fulfilling the prophecy potentially leads to a different fate. If Acerthorn was only criticizing the way that this information was delivered to the player, maybe I could, agree with him on that. But he's insisting that it's simply non-existent, which, again, just goes to showcase his lack of understanding of the game.
In the vast majority of good RPGs, the game first goes out of its way to make the player understand why the main quest is so important. In Skyrim, after you escape from Helgen, you begin to acclimate to the lives of the Skyrim locals, growing to care for a few of them. This means that the player is motivated to hunt down Alduin since he doesn't want Alduin to do to his new friends what he did to Helgen. In Dragon Age Origins, you began the game along with your family, giving much more weight to your duties as a Grey Warden than if the game had just began at Ostagar, because you, the player, realized what you were leaving behind and who you are charged with protecting. In Super Mario RPG, about 1/3 the way through the game, you were given a clear reason why you need to hunt down the star pieces in order to restore wishes to Mario's world. Fallout 4 is often criticized for completely botching this important part of RPG storytelling. Your mission in the main quest is to rescue your infant son and avenge the murder of your spouse. Two characters who the player, as opposed to the player character, barely know the first names of, let alone have grown to care for. Now, while I disagree that the game actually botches this section of the story, see my full retrospective on that game for more details, the fact that it is so criticized just goes to show how much RPG fans usually treasure this obligatory moment in their games.
Again, I'm just extremely confused by these comparisons. Is Dark Souls even similar to any of these games, again, outside of, they're all technically RPGs? Not to mention that in all of these examples, who's to say that the player even becomes attached to these things like you're suggesting that they would? In Skyrim, what if instead of learning about the locals, I go on a killing spree and murder everyone in the towns? Nothing's stopping me from doing this. I don't need to talk to them or learn about them or care about them. It's entirely dependent on the person playing. Anyone who chooses a different playstyle isn't going to experience this, so it's not a really good point. In Dragon Age, what if I just don't care about my family? Who's to say that's enough motivation for me? Mario RPG doesn't introduce clear objectives until 1/3 of the way into the game. It's interesting that you'd point this out, considering you yourself have only beaten 15% of Dark Souls before coming to this conclusion about its story. If it's okay for Mario RPG to hold out on its story until you beat 1/3 of it, why did you stop in Dark Souls at 15%? It seems to me like you're not upholding a consistent standard here when it comes to how you criticize games. And as far as the part about Fallout 4, again, it's important to consider the importance of certain elements in different games. From what I understand, bit of clarification here, I've never played Fallout games, but from what I know, a Fallout game relies a lot more on its story than a Souls game. Just because people criticized Fallout 4 for not having impactful story motivation doesn't mean that that's applicable to Dark Souls necessarily. These games are trying to accomplish different things. They can't be compared one-to-one like this. It just doesn't make sense.
Nobody gives a rat's ass about you. Nobody even cares if you succeed. And you have no personal stake in the fate of this world. You're just expected to work your way through this gauntlet of enemies with no context whatsoever for an undefined reward at the end.
You absolutely have a stake in the fate of the world. Doing nothing is death. You will go hollow. You will go insane. There's no escaping it. Fighting back is your only shot to avoid this literal hell-on-earth ending for yourself. And why should anyone else care about you or whether or not you succeed? It's not their journey. Again, you're not fighting to save the world, you're fighting to save yourself. The player does have context to fight, you've just missed it. This is essentially the end of his criticisms on the story elements of Dark Souls, so just to make abundantly clear here, you can definitely criticize Dark Souls' story, and its delivery of that story. I'm not pretending like it's a masterclass in video game narratives, but as for his first accusation about Dark Souls not having a story, It's literally just wrong. And as for claiming that the character has no motivation in the world, it's literally just wrong. And pretending that the game only has lore and that the lore doesn't have any impact on the storytelling, it's all just wrong. You've been wrong here, Acerthorn, on all of your accounts. You're not like arguing that the story is bad, which, is debatable. You're arguing that it's non-existent, which is just flat out wrong. And for the love of God, dude, stop comparing Dark Souls to Fallout and Skyrim. Like, I get it. You like Bethesda more than FromSoft, but they're not good comparisons.
Now, there are plenty of games out there where you are provided with minimal context, but where the level design alone provides a challenging, engaging, and rewarding experience. The Mario platformers are one example that come immediately to mind. However, in order for a game to succeed on those grounds, the gameplay, as opposed to the story, really needs to be at the top of its game. This is where Dark Souls is so commonly praised, not in its deep and emotionally driven story, but in its punishing difficulty, and it's also one where I feel the game falls rather flat.
So he finally addresses the fact that Dark Souls isn't known for its story, and that it's not why the game is praised to begin with. It's praised for the combat. I mean, personally, I'd argue that the exploration is just as important to these games, if not even more important, honestly. I think Matthew Matosis said it best. Dark Souls is kind of the sum is greater than the parts that make it up. That's not what that saying is, but anyways, go watch Matthew Matosis' retrospective. It's so much better. But back on topic, Acerthorn disagrees that the combat saves the game, so let's hear him out here.
The whole appeal behind this game is its punishing yet fair difficulty. To achieve this, the game needs to have enemies whose attack patterns can be memorized. If the game constantly throws curveballs at the player for no other reason than to just keep things difficult, that's not a fair challenge. That's just the game developers constantly changing the rules of the game simply because, lol, you can't get good at the game if the game is constantly shifting as soon as you get into a groove.
I don't necessarily know if I disagree with him here or not. I mean, procedurally generated games exist where the layout and structure is always changing, and people like games along those lines, but I do understand his point. In Dark Souls, if enemies were constantly shifting or inventing new moves on the spot or something, that would be very unfair to the player. But they don't do that in Dark Souls. In fact, I want you all to remember that he talked about how unfair this would be if the enemies were constantly shifting and changing locations and things along those lines. It'll be relevant soon.
Well, try as I might, I was unable to ascertain any real attack patterns from these enemies. Now, maybe you could argue that this was just me not noticing the enemy attack patterns, but you know what other gameplay mechanic I found to be just as frustrating and which doesn't have that excuse? These damn rats.
Okay, before we get into the mess of an argument that is the rats section of his video, I'd like to just point out that yes, Acerthorn, this is very much an example of you just not learning the enemy attack patterns. They are not unfair. Most Undead Hollow Knights have like 3 different moves, and all of their attacks are extremely telegraphed. They are incredibly simple enemies in this game. I mean, I'm not saying that they can't be challenging for new players. They can be. I'm not trying to suggest that, but Acerthorn is almost kind of hinting at the idea that the movesets are just potentially too difficult to ascertain, and that's just laughable. But, to his credit, he did say that this could be an issue more so with himself than with the game, and I do appreciate that distinction. That being said, let's move on to the rats.
If I get hit by them, I suffer a poison effect. Now, on paper, this doesn't seem like too much of a problem. However, the poison effect from these rats lasts so long that I need about 5 or 6 Estus flasks in order to avoid dying before the effect wears off. I need these Estus flasks since on a blind playthrough I have no way of knowing when I'll need them. So anytime I take a single hit from these rats, it's honestly in my best interests to return to the bonfire to restore my health and refill my Estus flasks.
Okay, so he's not wrong here. The rats do inflict poison, and poison does last a long time, and at this point in the game, a new player would probably not have any way to alleviate the poison effect, so they would end up taking a lot of passive damage they otherwise wouldn't. That definitely is punishing, but the thing that never gets mentioned here is that the rats are just so easy to avoid. Watch his footage. Like, why, Acerthorn, are you not utilizing your shield? Shielding the rats almost entirely negates the poison buildup. Blocking them is the easiest solution. It's so obvious. Why don't you just block them? You have a shield. A single block of an attack would show you that, oh hey, when I block, they can't inflict poison anymore. Now, maybe Acerthorn is doing a shieldless playthrough, even though he has one equipped. Or maybe he's watched a little too much H-Bomber Guy and decided that shields are for scrubs and you can't use them because playing with shields is playing the game wrong. And it's okay to think like that. I mean, it's not. This isn't even about Acerthorn. H-Bomber Guy is literally wrong on that. But you can play the game that way. But if that's the case, why are you just throwing yourself into the room with the 3 rats and letting them just gang up on you and attack you? Like, why aren't you dodging them or attacking them first or luring them out one at a time or using range tactics like a bow or a crossbow or fire bombs? Why not just sprint past them? It's only 3 tiny rats. They can't possibly stop you. All you have to do is just sprint past all of them to the ladder and you're home free. Not to mention, you said that they instantly poison you in 1 hit. This isn't true, as shown by your own footage. It takes 3 hits to poison you, not 1.
This has the effect of the rats being the equivalent of a 1-hit KO. While I would certainly expect that level of difficulty given Dark Souls' reputation, I would have expected that in the end game, not shortly after defeating the Taurus Demon, which is the first major boss in the game after the tutorial.
They are not essentially a 1-hit KO, Acerthorn. They're not inflicting curse, they're inflicting poison. The effect is incredibly slow. It is very possible for even a new player to explore an area with poison, even if they only have 5 Estus, which is a nuance that just never gets acknowledged here. Like, on the screen, you can see how quickly the poison damage affects you. Yeah, it's annoying, and yeah, it's punishing, but it is manageable, and again, the rats are so easy to begin with. I guess it's a good thing that Acerthorn completed as little of the game as he did, because I can only imagine his criticisms when he would get to Blighttown.
But for a minute, let's accept the difficulty. That is, after all, a main marketing point of this game. However, one thing that makes this absolutely unbearable is that every time I return to the bonfire, all the enemies respawn except for the bosses and mid-bosses. This means that every time I take even a single hit from these rats, I've essentially made no progress towards the next bonfire. There was no sense of progression for me, no sense of achievement, because my achievements were always undone. In addition to there being no context for fighting these enemies, there's also no closure. It's just a repetitive slog. I literally just keep fighting the same enemies. The exact same enemies over and 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 over and...
He goes on to do that for a minute. I'm not even joking. Like, you can literally time it. I'm pretty sure it's exactly a minute. First of all, Acerthorn, again, it's not 1 hit that makes you start over. It's 3. Like, just pointing out, your footage is actively disproving your statements. And secondly, yeah, the enemies do respawn and reappear in the same locations. Based on this emphasis of, like, how annoying this is for you, I can only assume that you would want one of 2 changes to happen, which is 1, the enemies never respawn after you've killed them, meaning that the world is completely devoid of any challenge, and the incentive to go back and play through any area, again, is completely lost. The challenge would just be completely sucked out of the game. You kill everything a single time and it never comes back. Anytime you'd need to run back through a previously beaten area of the world, it would just be empty space. It would be so boring. Does that sound fun to anyone? Because it doesn't to me. And the alternative to this is that Acer Thorn wants the enemies to constantly spawn in unique locations and be randomized so that you're never fighting the same enemies in the same areas after each death. But I can't believe that that's the case, because this would make the game far more punishing. Remember how earlier he said he was struggling to ascertain the movesets of the Hollow Knights? What if each time you fought them, they were swapped with different enemies, or they were relocated so you could never anticipate where they were going to be? I can't possibly believe he wants these things randomized. This would increase the difficulty tenfold. It is true, Acer Thorn, that each time you die, you have to fight the same enemies with the same movesets in the same positions. But doesn't this also mean that after each death, you can plan accordingly and strategically take out enemies because you know how they work and where they are? Instead of running into the rat's den for like the 50th time in a row without using your shield, wouldn't you be expected to realize after like the second or third time that the strategy you're employing isn't working and maybe you should approach the challenge in a different way? Keep in mind here, I'm not saying he needs to use the shield. I'm just saying that it would make it so much easier. But even without the shield, you would be able to notice that like this strategy isn't working. Maybe I should try a different approach. Is this really an example of bad game design? Or is it just you refusing to learn from your mistakes and being punished for it? Because I don't see this as being the result of a bad game. I see it as the result of a bad player. And I'm hoping that everyone else who sees this is able to come to that same conclusion. That's the end of his video, essentially. He once again throws out an insult to his fans, the ones that actively support him and his channel, and enable him to live the lifestyle that he lives by insisting that they all lied to him. Because everyone knows that he, as the creator, is entitled to all of his fans' time. If you're one of his fans, you owe him views and watch time. So, make sure you give that to him every single day. It's like you did sign the contract. To end this on my part, once again, I realize that Acer Thorn, he's just a dude that hates Dark Souls, and it's really not that big of a deal. But admittedly, this game is like a huge part of my life. It got me through shit times in high school, and it's still doing that in college. And it's one of my best memories of bonding moments between me and my older brother, and I rarely get to see him anymore. This game means a ton to me, and I hate seeing it slandered like this. I hate thinking that someone could see Acer Thorn's video and be turned off from the game without even trying it because of his opinion. Acer Thorn, if you're watching this, I don't hate you, but I'd really love to see two things out of you going forward. Firstly, be better to your fans. You're not owed views by them, regardless of whether or not they expressed interest in something or participated in a poll or whatever the hell. You're lucky to even have 1,500 people that take the time out of their day to stop watching like Markiplier or Try Not to Laugh compilations, and instead they devote it to you. I said it earlier, I think, but you have way too small and fluid of a fan base at this point to be walking around with this big of an ego, and you really need to check it before it becomes your downfall. Secondly, don't give retrospectives or in-depth reviews on games that you don't like and don't understand and haven't completed. An opinion piece is completely fine and reasonable. No issue with that. But don't frame it the way you framed this video. Like, aside from my opinions on it, it would save you so much of a headache. I've seen your comments, and I can tell you that you would avoid so much shit if you just specified more that this is just your opinion, and that you simply don't enjoy the game because it isn't for you. You didn't frame these issues as things you have against the game, you framed them as issues with the game itself, and you insulted the fan base several times along the way. That's not beneficial to everyone. Like, again, I know that in your video you clarified, this is my opinion, and I'm allowed to have my opinion, but you cited all of these things as though it's fact, and again, the framing of the video, retrospective, in-depth analysis, like, you can't blame people for getting upset at you when you just completely misrepresent the game. As for everyone else watching, I hope that you got something out of this video. this could be a one-off thing, or I could dip my toes in elsewhere, who knows. There are definitely a lot of other Acer Thorn videos that I could respond to, if nothing else, although I don't want to harass the dude. Feel free to like this, and, if you think it was decently done, leave comments, feedback would be great. This is my first time, so I'm very open to any criticism against this video. If my points were okay, or if you agree more with Acer Thorn, or whatever the hell. As far as, anyone who watches this, please don't go to Acer Thorn's video to, harass him or leave mean comments or something along those lines. He gets enough shit already from what I've seen. He really doesn't need any more, so I definitely don't condone any of that. But yeah, outside of that, can't thank you all enough for watching this all the way through, and until next time, keep it saucy.